Hey leader, and welcome to episode number 347 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baritone Advisors. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel, so make sure you're subscribed there as well. And if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's made an impact on your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever app you listen to podcasts through. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, in today's episode, you'll hear my conversation with David Salyers, who was one of the original 2 marketing executives at Chick-fil-A. He spent 37 years in Chick-fil-A's marketing department and most recently served as a vice president. Having worked at Chick-fil-A for most of his career, he saw the principles of servant leadership and compassion play out in the growth of more than 2,300 Chick-fil-A restaurants around the country. David is now using his expertise and passion to spark the growth of individuals, teams, and organizations. He serves as a board member for numerous organizations and has helped launch several startups and nonprofits. Notably, David is also a founding partner of Rome, a shared workspace that is on mission to make work matter. In 2018, David founded Spark a Revolution, where he and his team help companies create the competitive advantage by building remarkable cultures and brands, and co-wrote his book, Remarkable, to impart leadership lessons that transform workplace culture. And in our conversation, you'll hear him talk about the leadership lessons that he learned at Chick-fil-A, his favorite memory of Truett Cathy, what sets Chick-fil-A apart as an organization, and so much more. You're going to love this conversation, but before we get into it, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Baritone Advisors. The financial advisors at Baritone Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baritone Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baritoneadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baritone Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. My wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings at Henny Jewelers, and we just loved our experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in, they give them a book to help prepare for marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with David Salyers. Well, hey, David, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time, and I can't wait for the value you're going to add to our audience. And I want to start with really just talking about an overview of your Chick-fil-A career. You had a 37-year career at Chick-fil-A and started when you were pretty young. Can you give us just a brief overview of what that experience was like?
Yeah, happy to. First, it's an honor to be with you. And Jesse, it's an honor to have you joining us today. And I guess, Doug, you'll explain that. But I met Truett Cathy when I was a junior in college. And it's amazing to me, maybe even a little divine intervention on that one, but met him then. And it's interesting, Doug, at age 21, when I was a senior in college, I had everything about life figured out, as most 21-year-olds do. Yep. Jesse, you're closer to 21 than me. But here's how I had it all figured out. I figured I was going to graduate from college, make as much money as I could, as fast as I could, to retire as early as I could. And I thought the whole point of work was to retire from it, because that's kind of what I've been taught, from culture, and it's, people aspire. So I'd set 35 as my goal. I said, if I can just be retired by age 35, how could life get any better than that? That's the best idea I had as a 21-year-old. And a lot of 21-year-olds that I share that with now, they think that's the best idea they got.
Yeah. What were you going to do with all that free time? What was the dream? Were you like, hey, I'll just golf all day? Or?
Well, that's what's so funny is, because when you think about that goal a little deeper, it's like, okay, well, if your whole goal is to stop doing whatever you're doing as soon as possible, what does that tell you about how much you're enjoying it? And so, I tell you today, I'm so glad that didn't happen. Sometimes what's great in life are the things that don't happen. I'm so glad that didn't happen in my life, because in going to work for Chick-fil-A and going to work for Truett Cathy, I found something what I would call 1,000 times better than early retirement. Something that as a 21-year-old, I never could have even imagined existed, something that never had crossed my mind. And even if you had suggested it to me, I'm not sure I would have believed it. And so instead of finding the job I could retire from early, I found the job I wouldn't want to retire from. See, that thought had never crossed my mind, that there could be a job you wouldn't want to retire from, or even should be a job you wouldn't want to retire from. But when you think about it, if retiring early is all about stopping doing whatever you're doing as soon as possible, then finding the job you wouldn't want to retire from is finding something you would never want to stop doing because you're loving it so much and you're enjoying it so much. And so Truett Cathy role modeled that. He lived it out in front of me, and he role modeled that. He used to talk about the fact that if you love what you do, you'll never work another day in your life. So I feel like I've never worked a day in my life, gotten paid anyway. Pretty good gig if you can get it. But there's so much more to it than that, which is what I want to dig into on this podcast. But I think just starting with that, one thing that changes everything sometimes in life. And that one thing, I thought, again, as a 21-year-old, I was convinced. Retire by 35, that's as good as it gets. And now I found something so much better. And it's funny, Truett role model that in so many ways. I remember going into his office when he was in his 80s. And I'd say, Truett, what are you still doing here, man? Your 401k fully funded. It's like you're the sole owner of a multi-billion-dollar. Why are you still here? And he'd say, why would I stop doing something I love this much?
Come on.
And just being around that, it's like, wow. Because what I found is that I think work was designed to be something rewarding, enriching, exciting, fulfilling. It's just most people don't experience it that way. But I got to experience it that way. Thanks to Truett and thanks to Chick-fil-A, I just got to experience a version of work that most people never even think about. Like I said, had I not worked for Chick-fil-A and Truett, I might have, had a whole different path in life.
Yeah,
but,
and I was gonna say, on those same lines, I think I heard you say in another interview that you had a mentor at some point come around early in your career and say, there's 4 things that you should look for.
Yeah.
When can you say those?
Let's talk about that. That's fantastic. So, it's interesting. While I was in college, because my goal was to retire early, I had done really well in college, and I was one of those kids, while everyone else is out partying on Saturday night, I'm studying, and while everyone else is out playing, I'm trying to lead organizations, and I'm trying to mold and shape myself into somebody who could retire by age 35. And so I was very driven, very dedicated. And so the dilemma for me when I graduated is that I had a lot of really good offers. A lot of really good offers coming out of college that would have paid me a lot more money than Chick-fil-A. In fact, Chick-fil-A was the worst offer I had by about 50%. It was like 50% less than what I was being offered other places. And yet there was something about it that was intriguing to me. I couldn't figure it out. I'm a stupid 21-year-old. It was not very clear to me why. I just knew that something inside of me said, gosh, that still seems appealing, but I can't figure it out because if my goal is to retire early, and that job's 50% less, I don't see how that's putting me any closer to my goal. So I had a mentor in my life, a guy that I'd worked for at Six Flags Over Georgia. I had worked in the marketing department at Six Flags Over Georgia during college, during the summers as an intern. And that's really how I fell in love with marketing. Originally, when I went to college, I thought I wanted to be an attorney. And my dad was an attorney. My older brother is an attorney. And that was kind of the path I was in, and did a summer internship, changed my life. Just fell in love with marketing. In fact, I was at Wake Forest, Doug, at the time, and they didn't have a marketing major. So I ended up switching to University of Georgia, which that's where I ended up meeting Truett, and one thing leads to another. But so I ended up graduating from University of Georgia. Again, I'd done really well academically, done really well extracurricularly, had a lot of good offers. So I sat down with Dave Kaplan. He actually came to the University of Georgia. Doug, this seems like it was yesterday. I was sitting in the parking lot of the ATO house. I was president of ATO, my fraternity, and I explained this dilemma to him. I said, I got all these great offers. This one from Chick-fil-A seems interesting, but I can't figure it out. And didn't take him a nanosecond to figure it out. He said, Salyers? He said, the last thing you need to worry about coming out of college is how much money you make. Wow. He said, you need to find 4 things. He said, first, find a leader that you want to be more like. Take a look at the leader that you're putting yourself under. That's a picture of the future you. Do you like that picture? And, Truett said it differently. Truett said, we become like those we surround ourselves with, for better or worse. So I think it's not only the leader you put yourself under, but it's the people you'll be surrounded by will mold and shape who you become. So who's like, take a look at all those offers, and is the leader that you're putting yourself under and the people you're putting yourself around a picture of the future you want for yourself. So that was issue number one. Issue number two is, he said, the first question you're going to get whenever you get in a social setting, party or whatever, is what? Where do you work? And so he said, are you going to be proud of the answer to that question? Are you working somewhere you'll be proud to tell people this is where you work? Truett, again, said it this way. All these things I learned from Truett, just different words, but kind of the same idea. Truett he lived his entire life by Proverbs 22:1. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. So Truett would have said a good name is rather to be chosen than great. And so I'm looking for great riches. And really what I need to be looking for was a good name. And Truett was very concerned about his personal good name and the good name of Chick-fil-A along the way. So that was issue number two. So first, put yourself under a leader you want to become more like. Second, does the company you work for have a good name you'd be proud to tell people this is who I work for? Third, he said, each of us is kind of uniquely gifted to do certain things. Does the job that you're signing up for allow you to do what you're uniquely gifted to do? So many times, Doug, especially in college, especially if somebody wants to just make as much money as they can, as fast as they can to retire as over, the question is, what majors pay the most money? And that's what you should major in. Well, that's great if you're good at that. It's terrible if that's not what you're naturally gifted at doing. And so basically he was saying, what are you naturally gifted at doing? And does this job involve that? That's the third thing. And then fourth, he said, find a job you'd be passionate about doing. And I'm going to elaborate on that. By passionate, it kind of means two things. Is it a job that charges your battery while you're doing it? Or is it a job that drains your battery? Because you want to be in a job that's charging your battery, not draining your battery. And the second thing I've learned about passion along the way is the things we're passionate about in life are the things we're happy to sacrifice for. So are you taking a job that you'd be happy to make sacrifices because that job, you're so good at it and you're so passionate about what you're doing and the mission you're on and all the rest? And so I think we need to be missionaries, not mercenaries, is a way to think about it. So many people are just signing up like I was for the size of the paycheck. But I think the better strategy is sign up for the size of a mission that you're passionate to be on. So he said, if you'll find those four things, a leader you want to be more like and people you want to be more like, surrounded by, a brand you'd be proud to work for, proud to tell people, good name, a job you're uniquely gifted to do, and a job you're passionate about doing. He said, if you can find those four things, money will never be your problem. And it's like the scales fell from my eyes at that point. Suddenly I saw why I was struggling, because the other jobs I had certainly would have paid more coming out of college, but didn't have, in some cases, any of those four things, but certainly not all four. But Chick-fil-A had all four of those in, Technicolor. Yeah. And so I ended up, that was the day, it was like instantly I said, okay, I'm going to work for Chick-fil-A. That makes total sense to me.
And David, you talked a lot about the pursuit of money and that we shouldn't pursue it. Although, just like you mentioned, as you pursued those four things, obviously you stayed at Chick-fil-A for 37 years. I'm assuming that similar to Truett, that towards the end of your career at Chick-fil-A, you were also in a position where you had some money. And just out of curiosity, we have a lot of young leaders listening to this. Now that you have some money and, in a position where you could have retired earlier, done anything you want to do, what does money do for you when you actually have some? Does it actually fulfill that desire that you had when you were 21? What would your advice be?
Here's the way I think about money now. Money is the fruit, not the object of a career. It's the fruit of doing something well, not the object of what you're doing. And what I was doing at age 21 is making money the object of what I was doing. And so let me just elaborate just a little more because you do have a lot of young leaders. Let me tell you what I stepped into at Chick-fil-A. It's not the Chick-fil-A that you think of today. Jesse, it's not the Chick-fil-A you signed up for. At that time, the entire headquarters was in a converted air freight warehouse. And there were probably 25 people on the staff, something like that, all in a converted air freight warehouse. They ran out of room in the warehouse. So they cut a hole through the wall, pulled up a mobile home. And my first office was in a mobile home attached to a warehouse.
Wow.
So, and I had offers from people like Coca-Cola and Delta. They had these massive headquarters with all the, cool stuff. And I'm in a warehouse. And remember, this is a kid who thinks he wants to retire by age. So it didn't look like a great place to start. But man, was it a great story to be part of and was a great place to finish. And that's why I want to get into some of this. The other thing that was interesting, Doug, is when I joined, it wasn't near as profitable as it is today. At that time, we were only in 100% of the locations were in shopping malls. And at any point in time during my early years, I call it my first 10 years, 40% of our operators were unprofitable.
Wow.
That's unimaginable today. I doubt there's one operator in the whole chain that's unprofitable. But back then it was 40%. So half my job was to keep people in the game, like be able to paint a picture of a brighter future, convince myself of that because we weren't doing all that great. The second thing I'd tell you is for my first 10, maybe 15 years at Chick-fil-A, 100% of the people I hired at Chick-fil-A took a cut and pay to come, including myself. If you just look at the offers that I had. And I'm telling you, that was the foundation that's created the incredible opportunities that Chick-fil-A is now. But we had to learn those lessons. And so I think early in your career, that's part of the magic of what Dave Kaplan told me is he said, Salyers, the last thing you need to worry about is how much money you're going to make. Coming right out of school, it's all about preparing yourself for a really bright future. Not about how much money you make in the short run. It's can you set yourself up to make a lot of money in the long run? And the best way to make a lot of money is to not focus on that. It's to focus on doing a great job, and then the money becomes the fruit, not the object of what you're doing. So go ahead. No, go ahead.
No. I was going to say that's so good. I had my father-in-law, who was an instrumental mentor in my life at a very much a time of need, came into my life. And as he started to invest in me as a young leader, he would say the same thing. He said, hey, don't worry about the money. The money will come. Just get good. Just get good. And I'm so grateful for that advice. You're talking about the story of Chick-fil-A and where you guys started, which, again, if people just look outside the door, I think they'll understand where Chick-fil-A is now. I know John Maxwell is a friend of Chick-fil-A, and he talks a lot about the law of the lid. And a lot of times that leaders, as if they don't continue to grow, they'll eventually hit a lid and not be able to go where they need to go. You stayed, and it seems like a lot of the core leadership team, we interviewed Mark Miller for the podcast. It seemed like so many of the leaders that started with you and Truett, et cetera, have been able to grow and scale with the company. I'm curious, what enabled you, and as you look at some of the other leaders that have also scaled, what enables leaders to scale versus those who do hit a lid and are unable to grow into their full potential?
Such a good question. And I think it's a couple of things. One is you have to hire to that. And what I mean by it, whenever I would interview people, I was never hiring them for the immediate job that needed to be done. I was always looking 10 or 15 years down the road and say, can this person do what I need them to do 10 or 15 years down the road? Not can they do what I need them to do today? And part of the way you would assess that is track record. What's their past track record? Have they always been, an extra effort kind of person? Have they always accomplished things above and beyond the norm? So, because part of what you got to do is you got to bring in the right people to begin with. And then you've got to create the context for them to succeed. And one of the things I loved about Chick-fil-A is that Chick-fil-A viewed the business as a platform. Most businesses view people, they use their people to grow the business. I think the most remarkable businesses use the business to grow the people. And I think Truett had an eye for, we're going to use the business to grow the people, not the other way around, because with a 97% retention rate, which is what the retention rate was for my entire career there.
Wow.
You don't have a lot of opportunity to bring people in. It's like you've got 97% of the people and they're staying, so they have to grow. And to the degree that they grow, the business can grow as well. And I think you have to hire to that. And then you've got to create the conditions for them to grow. And Chick-fil-A was always generous, Doug. I don't know that I can think of a time where there was something I wanted to do to develop myself that they didn't allow me to do. And it's almost just part of the DNA that we're all, Mark Miller, you mentioned him earlier. He talks about the fact that leaders are learners. And I think at Chick-fil-A, we hire people who are learners and want to learn, and then we give them the ability to learn. We give them all the opportunities to learn. One of my styles of learning is I used to love to do what we call corporate tourism. And corporate tourism is, if you want to become excellent, you got to study excellence. And so I would love to go study companies. It's funny. We wouldn't go study McDonald's or Burger King or Wendy's. We'd go study Apple and Google and Zappos and, Patagonia. And we'd go to find excellence wherever it existed and go study it and then say, now, how can we translate that back to Chick-fil-A? And what was really cool is early on in my career, you'd have to beg, borrow, and steal your way in to get to, see somebody. A lot of times Coca-Cola became a good friend because Coke, had lots of relationships. They could get us in places we couldn't get ourselves. But by the end of my career, it's like you tell them Chick-fil-A wants to come, they're like rolling out the red carpet and inviting you in. They'll pay for your trip. But it was, so on the back end, it was real easy to get to see all these other companies. On the front end, much harder. But nonetheless, I learned a lot from watching the very best, the way they thought about things, the way they did things, the way they strategized and systematized and processed things. So a lot of becoming excellent is to study excellence. And Chick-fil-A gave me lots of opportunities to do that, both in the classroom, but also through studying other companies and what other people did and hanging around with other leaders that were excellent.
Yeah. Is there any other advice you'd give leaders? You were 21 when you started, which again, I know you just started when you started, but what advice do you have for leaders when it comes to actually recruiting and engaging and developing emerging leaders? I know you said, offer them courses, et cetera, pay for that. Anything internally that you guys did intentionally when it came to leadership? I mean,
it was constant, Doug. There's so many things. Like we would do mentoring groups. I'll give you one example. The entire organization systematically mentors each other. So our executive committee every year would select two people. Anybody in the corporation could nominate people to be mentored by our most senior leaders. And so all the most senior leaders every year would mentor typically two people for an entire year. They'd have an entire year plan. Then all of our vice presidents, the officers, they would all mentor people. Like in my case, the marketing department leaders would mentor someone. So it's this cascading of mentoring from top to bottom. And the amazing thing is, sometimes the best way to learn something is to have to teach it. Many times where you learn more is having to teach someone else than being taught. But literally it was an entire process that our training department oversaw, where they would keep records of how you'd been trained through the years, what courses you've been to, what mentoring groups you've been part of, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was just like the DNA of Chick-fil-A was to develop you, and lots of opportunities to do that. Everything from classrooms to mentorships to corporate tourism to spending time with each other. I used to, every year I would have a mentoring group that I would do with people that I work with, and even inside my department, but also outside. And we would study books together. We'd go through podcasts together. We'd have kind of a monthly rhythm where we would either do a book or a podcast or even invite in a guest speaker. But here's what was fascinating to me. Let's say we read a book together. We'd all show up having read the same book. And then we talk about it. And by the end of it, I said, did I even read the same book as these? It's like they would get so much more out of it than I would. And the richness of learning really took place in the dialogue more than the reading itself. Because when I heard all their interpretations of what we learned and then we started talking about it, it's like 10x more powerful than just reading the book by yourself.
So good.
And then I found that nowadays people don't read as much. So now what I've done is do chapters at a time, and we assign them to people. Let's say that a book had 12 chapters. Well, maybe you just assign a chapter to each person, and then they come equipped to teach the rest of you. Everybody has the option to read that chapter, but somebody really goes deep. So that's a strategy nowadays that works a lot better, just because we don't have time to read as much, not as much interest. Podcasts are another thing you can all listen to and then unpack it. But I think just creating this ongoing desire to learn and grow is a really important part of the formula.
Yeah, obviously a great leader that you got to spend a lot of time with was Truett, and you've talked a little bit about what he taught you. A few questions on that relationship. One, if you have any advice on how any of us can bump into future billionaire, Let us know. I mean, it seems like if that was strategic at all, mad props to you.
I don't remember when I was sitting in the mobile home attached to the warehouse thinking that that's what I was bumping into at the time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. But I'm curious, do you have a favorite memory from Truett, whether it was something fun or a lesson that you learned or a time you were with him?
Yeah. I do. I have so many fond memories. Early on in my career, it seems weird now, and I think somebody like Jesse, is going to be. But like we were such a small group. I went on vacation. I went to Cancun, Mexico, with him and his family. We went snowmobiling together. All this stuff, which seems amazing now, but at the time, it's like there's just a handful of this. It's very natural and normal at the time. But probably one of my favorite memories is, and this tells so much about Truett. He got invited to come speak to a marketing group at Berry College. And he kind of set the tone, as I think about it. He would never go on a trip while I was there where he wouldn't take somebody with him because he was always trying to mentor. So wherever he went, he'd invite people to go with him. So I got invited to go to Berry College. And it turns out, I don't know how much you know about Truett, but he fell in love with Berry College that week when I went with him. He had never been there before, and we went together. And I just saw him fall in love. And now there are all kind of programs that Chick-fil-A sponsors up at Berry College now. There's a summer camp. There's a college student group that's kind of separate from the year. All these things there's a family retreat center up there, all these things he's done up there. But here's what's so funny is he invited me to go with him because he was speaking to a marketing class. And this is, a year or so into my career, maybe 2 years, not very long. And I'm so excited because I'm going to get to learn from the master, so I have my notebook and I got my pad of paper and I'm ready to go. And, first of all, this will give you an insight into what he was like as a person. Back then, to be frugal, if two guys were traveling, you would just share a hotel room to save money. So I'll never forget. I woke up the next morning to a shrill scream. I'm fast asleep. All of a sudden I hear this scream and Truett is running over with the ice bucket and he throws it on me and there's socks in it and all these socks. I'll never forget.
That is awesome.
I'm like getting ready for the ice and it's got socks in it, but that's the kind of jokester that he was. But then we went to the marketing class and I'm like so excited to learn from the master. So he said, "Hi, I'm Truett Cathy. And this is David Salyers. We're here to talk to you about marketing. David, why don't you come up and tell them about marketing?" And I'm like, I learned when Truett invites you to go, you may end up being the one to do the talk. Wow. So he threw me up there to the wolves and I had to do a talk on marketing that I thought I was there to learn from him. And instead, he wanted me to go up and do the talk. So that was Truett. That's classic Truett, And
do you have one or two lessons maybe from his life or from his leadership?
Oh, there's so many. Throughout the course of this, we'll probably, stumble upon all these Truettisms that come up periodically. But I'll kind of give you a macro idea that was really powerful for me. I think about business people, and most people who start a business think of business as what I would call a get-rich scheme. They start a business because they want to get rich. How common is that? And there's nothing wrong with it. It's very common. And in fact, guilty as charged. At age 21, what did I think my business career was all about? Getting rich. I bought into that hook, line, and sinker, and that's exactly what I was thinking. And so, there's nothing wrong with business as a get-rich scheme, but when you think about it a level deeper, what it basically means is it's a self-enrichment scheme. It's like, I'm going to get rich, and I'm going to get rich at the expense of someone. So who are we going to get rich at the expense of as a business owner? Well, we get rich at the expense of our employees. We get rich at the expense of our customers. We get rich at the expense of our suppliers. We get rich at the expense of the communities we serve. This get-rich scheme is kind of a self-enrichment scheme, which is why business in many ways has such a bad reputation. And it's why the politicians can talk about, business as the evil empire and the, greedy capitalist pigs and all this stuff. What Truett modeled for me is the polar opposite of business as a get-rich scheme. What I feel like he modeled for me was something I would call a be rich scheme. Sounds very similar, doesn't it? Get rich and be rich. Sounds almost identical, but they're polar opposites. See, business as a be rich scheme means how do we use our platform of business to be rich toward people, not get rich from them? So how do we use our platform of business to be rich toward our employees? How do we use our platform of business to be rich toward our customers? How do we use our business platform? This is the one I'd love to talk about. Be rich toward our suppliers.
Wow.
See, suppliers usually are win-lose kind of, it's shark eat, or, dog eat dog. And we want to, get them to lower their price and stuff. But Chick-fil-A always saw our partners or suppliers as an opportunity to be rich toward them. And then finally, how do we use our business as a platform to be rich toward the communities we serve? And so I saw Truett role model all of that before my very eyes. And that's why, that's one of the main reasons when that's the central organizing idea behind your business, your success might be, just infinitely more than the people you compete against. When a get rich business has to compete against a be rich business, it's almost not fair. As long as they're limited to competing against when a get rich business competes with a get rich business, not so bad. But it's almost not fair when they have to compete against a be rich business.
Yeah, on the note of competition there, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but I was blown away when I heard you share the stat on the comparison between Chick-fil-A and other fast food restaurants.
Yeah.
As far as revenue per store. Yep. Can you share that?
And I think that's love to share that. This would be the perfect time to share it.
Yeah.
So Chick-fil-A competes in one of the most ferocious industries imaginable. It is a dog eat dog world. There are about 200 top chains that Chick-fil-A would compete against. And if you took all those chains and you added up, let's say the advertising that they do, it'd be the biggest advertising budget in the world. It's the 200 chains compete on price. How common is it to see a 99-cent sandwich or buy 5, get 1 free or what? It's just a real price sensitive market. Right now, there's a lot of competition for talent. On and on and on it goes. It is a ferocious dog eat dog place to be. So last year, the average fast food chain, based on last records I saw, on average does about $800,000. If you took all 200 chains, and said, took the annual revenue per restaurant and then averaged it, it'd be somewhere about $800,000. McDonald's is not only the golden arches, they are the gold standard of the business. They are really, really good. There's a lot of reasons McDonald's, has done, is so admired by so many people, including myself and Chick-fil-A. So last year, the figure I saw was in an $800,000 business, they did $2.8 million on average per restaurant.
Wow.
Think about that. Wow. Now, here's what's fascinating is Chick-fil-A is closed 52 more days than any one of the other 199 restaurant chains we compete against. And what's interesting is you could make the argument that that's one of the stupidest decisions that Truett Cathy ever made, because if you just looked at the numbers on a spreadsheet, just use data. We love to talk about science and data. So you just use the data on this, and Sunday is arguably the single best day to be open. Doug, I also love to be the attorney to represent Chick-fil-A, and maybe they aren't the idiots we think they are. And if I was the attorney for Chick-fil-A, here's the case that I would make. Here would be my exhibit A for the judge. I'd say, okay, Chick-fil-A competes in this ferocious category like we just talked about. The average restaurant does $800,000 business. So it's basically an $800,000 business. McDonald's, $2.8 million. Chick-fil-A closed 52 more days than anyone else they compete against, arguably judged the 52 best days to be open. In fact, you could argue that they lose 20% of their sales based on being closed on Sunday alone. But do you realize, would it be interesting to you if you found out that in an $800,000 business, closed 52 more days than anyone else, the average Chick-fil-A last year did $8 million
what?
In an $800,000 category. 10x the norm in 52 less days. 3 times, more than 3 times what McDonald's does in 52 less days. And this just defies gravity. It's like people don't understand it. And then, what a lot of people would then argue is, well, if you would just open on Sunday, you'd probably do 20% more. Anybody who's been at Chick-fil-A more than 10 minutes would tell you, single biggest way you could kill Chick-fil-A would be to open on Sunday. It's just such a cultural norm there. And it's so important from a value standpoint. It's the very reason that we do the 8 million. It doesn't keep us from doing that. It's actually what powers it.
Can you also, that's unbelievable. Can you also, I've heard you talk about a value imbalance and your ability to charge prices, because you also price differently than your competitors as well.
Yep.
You don't have a 99-cent menu to my knowledge, et cetera.
Yep.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the problem that we all face in business is that every customer I know wants to get a good value. Doug, when you spend your hard-earned money, Jesse, when you spend your hard-earned money, you want to get a value imbalance in your favor. And value equals what you get divided by what you pay. And so the easy way to create that value imbalance for people is to focus on the numerator, and reduce what people pay. And so in our industry, that's a quick and easy way to make things happen. If you think about it, the vast majority of the people, that's the way they create the value imbalance that customers are looking for. The problem with that, though, we can all see. Well, first of all, why do they do it? I think that's a good starting point. Well, they do it because, one, it works, and, if Chick-fil-A were to do a 99-cent sandwich tomorrow, guarantee you it would work. People would be lined up. Not only would it work, I could prove to the CFO that it worked because I could count, weigh, and measure the results. And it would work immediately, and it wouldn't take a lot of thought. How much effort would it take? But I used to tell Trude, I said, if the best idea I have to grow sales at Chick-fil-A is to discount the product, a kindergartner could come up with that idea, but people do it all the time. But the biggest problem is if you really have the customer's best interest in mind, let's say that Chick-fil-A sandwich, is a $5 sandwich. The most value you could ever create using that strategy of reducing the numerator is $5 worth of value. So, but the problem is the minute you reduce, the sandwich to 99 cents or whatever, and then the next day you want them to pay $5 again, what happens? Oh, so it's not very sustainable, and you can't do it profitably. And you create a sense of distrust with your customers because they're like, why could you afford to sell it to me for 99 cents and then you got to sell it to me for $5? It creates an underlying distrust with your customers. So our rule at Chick-fil-A was we never discount, but we still wanted to create the value imbalance that our customers wanted. We just focused on the numerator instead of the denominator, the top, what you get, not what you pay. And the beauty of focusing on what you get versus what you pay is, one, we just charged a fair price every day, and so we didn't have to change the price, but it was infinite the value that we could create above the line where it was limited below the line. And we always said we want them to, come pay $10 at Chick-fil-A and feel like they got $30 worth of value. And so we had an entire strategy to accomplish this. We used to talk about the fact that, first of all, let me dig in on that value a minute. So what does it look like to create value above the line? Well, there's all kind of ways you can do it. One way you can do is focus on pain points. Like we used to study the pain points of doing business with us. So a great example of that would be the drive-through. It hadn't been that long ago that the most cars we could get through the drive-through would be maybe 100 cars in an hour, and it would be painful, and it would be, and now, last I heard, we've got individual locations because we redesigned the drive-through. We got people out taking orders. And we got people who can do 500 and 600 cars in an hour.
Wow.
Where 100 used to be the max. But imagine how much pain we've relieved. It's almost like, your car never stops moving with the redesign of the drive-through. And so, we've given you back some time, and that's worth something. I'll give you another example. One of our operators, and so many of our greatest ideas came from the field. One of our operators noticed that a pain point that a parent would experience would be they have to go park. They'd have to get their kids, through the parking lot. Then they have to come stand in line, keep them all in order. Then they have to order, keep them in order. Then they have to get their food, keep them in order, then go sit down. It's really painful as a parent with a bunch of kids. So one of our operators came up with the idea of parent valet one time. And basically the way a parent valet would work is you pull in, you leave your kids strapped in their seats in the car, pull in the drive-through order. and then go walk in and they have your food on a table ready to go. And, we've reduced half the hassle. So on and on and on it would go. Pain points are a great place and then service is a great place. I'll never forget the birth of second mile service at Chick-fil-A happened, interestingly, in the last financial crisis that we went through in 2007 and 8. And during 2007 and 8, the entire country was going through a crisis, not unlike the one we just come through. Only it was a banking crisis last time, financial crisis. But what everyone was doing was cutting back on employees. They were cutting back on costs. They were basically trying to save themselves rich. And Truett and Dan came up with the idea that we were going to go on the offensive, not the defensive. And they had this crazy idea that we were going to ramp up our service. It has now become known as the Second Mile Service Initiative. And we were going to spend millions of dollars in a time we didn't have millions of dollars. Think COVID right now, how everybody was cutting back. Well, they had this grand initiative and nobody, it's funny now. Everybody, if you talk to now, thinks it's a good idea. But at the time I was there, no one thought it was a good idea, myself included. It's like, we don't have this money. You guys are crazy. But fortunately, they were the owners. And it was a crazy idea. It turned out to be a crazy good idea. So we developed the entire second mile service initiative in the midst of a financial crisis. We spent millions of dollars to develop second mile service, to bring in operators and their team leaders to train on second mile service. And we launched it. And sure enough, if you look at today, why people do business with Chick-fil-A, it's more about the service than the food. But here was the argument against it at the time. And this is what I really want to make a point of. So many great ideas don't look good at the time they're suggested. Because the argument against this, again, if I was the attorney, the argument I'd make against second mile service would be no one comes to fast food for service. By definition, they're coming because they want their food fast. If they wanted good service, they would go to a place, a white tablecloth, or a place that has a waitress, where not only would they pay $20 for that same breast of chicken, but they'd add a tip for the server. If they wanted good service, that's where they'd go. You're nuts to implement service in a place they're not looking for it. But what Truett and Dan saw that I think the rest of us didn't see was this is a place to create great value. If you're paying $20 or $30 for that same chicken because of the service, but you could get it for $8 or $9, you've just created a $30 experience for $8 or $9. Wow. And so their whole idea is let's create the kind of service you'd expect at a white tablecloth restaurant. And so second mile service was born. And now, again, people comment more on Chick-fil-A service. And most people will say, I come for the service more than the food. And interestingly, the second mile service initiative for the drive-through was born at that time. So this whole idea of reinventing the drive-through experience was kind of a subset of second mile service. And it's been worked on now for 10 years. And when COVID hit, you know what saved our business? The drive-through. For most of COVID, the drive-through was all we had. But we've been working on it for 10 years, not because we knew COVID was coming, but because of the second mile service initiative. So that same initiative is the thing that saved the business this next time around. This seems like such a crazy idea the first time. So
what a journey you've been on. And I feel like we can go on for a whole nother hour. And you did marketing, and you're known for your expertise in culture building as well. And I feel like we haven't even gotten hop in there. I do want to ask you a few lightning round questions, but before we do, I'll leave this open-ended. Any advice for marketing or culture building or anything else you want to leave with leaders as far as how they can work with you and plug in with your work now?
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting little tidbit. They say that life has to be lived forward, but is best understood in reverse. So I'm now on the other side, looking back on my 37 years at Chick-fil-A. And here's one of the fascinating things. I retired from Chick-fil-A 4 years ago. And first question people ask is, well, I thought you had the job you didn't want to retire from. Why would you retire from it? And I tell people, I haven't retired. I've rewired. And I told Dan Cathy when I left, I said, I am still on the same mission I've been on at Chick-fil-A for the last 37 years. I just want to apply it beyond Chick-fil-A. And here's the reason. Last year I was at Chick-fil-A, 80,000 people applied for 100 opportunities. And what used to break my heart is, what are the other 79,900 going to do that would love to be at Chick-fil-A? And we don't have enough opportunities. So I felt like the best way I could thank Truett Cathy, the best way I could thank the Cathy family and Chick-fil-A for the incredible gift they've given me in working there for 30 is to go recreate that for other people. Mm-hmm. So I now have 7 different businesses that I'm involved with on a pretty intentional basis. And basically the common thread between all of them, I'm trying to recreate for other people the incredible business experience that Chick-fil-A and Truett, the Cathy family, created for me. So I'm in the process of applying what I learned to new businesses to create those kind of opportunities for people outside of Chick-fil-A. And so that's the mission I'm on now. And I love it. It's like financially, I could afford to retire now if I wanted to. But I'm just like, Truett, why would I stop doing something I love this much? It was not about the money then. It's not about the money now, but the money sure shows up when you do the right things for the right reason. And now that's no longer a pressure. But that's what I'm doing now. The common denominator between everything I'm doing now is to recreate the incredible business experience. But here's what I was going to say in answer to your question. As I look back, I'm 4 years out of Chick-fil-A. I get called all the time by people from Chick-fil-A, but interestingly, almost never about marketing. I spent 37 years in marketing, but it's almost never about marketing. It's almost always about culture. And so I started scratching my head saying, why would people call me about culture? I wasn't in the HR department. I wasn't in charge of culture. And it kind of made me scratch my head, say, what's the correlation between marketing and culture? And I've kind of come to this conclusion that every great brand creates a great story that people want to be part of. Mm-hmm. And there's kind of 2 portals into that story. There's the customer portal into that story. That's called marketing and branding. Marketing and branding is kind of shorthand for the story that people want to be part of. So for instance, this sweater, if I were to add 20 cents worth of thread to this sweater that I'm wearing and put a Nike swoosh on it, what just happened to the value of this sweater? It went up probably $20 for 20 cents worth of thread. But it's really not about the 20 cents worth of thread. It's the Nike swoosh is shorthand for the story of Nike that people want to be part of, that they want to be emotionally connected to. So marketing and branding is all about creating a story that customers want to be part of. And the greatest marketers understand that, and that's what they focus on. But interestingly, there's another dimension to that same story. It's called culture. And culture is the story that employees want to be part of a great brand. But the 2 stories are connected. The culture story and the brand story have to be perfectly aligned. They got to be the same story. You can't tell a different story to the customers that your culture can't fulfill. And so there needs to be a real alignment between culture and marketing, but a lot of the principles are the same. The principles to build a great culture are the same principles that you use to build a great brand, just applied to a different audience. Here's the other thing I've learned. Your customers will never be more passionate about your business than your own employees are. So if you want to up the ante on the strength of your brand and the passion of emotional connection to your brand, you start with your employees, and the higher you can drive with your employees, that's what gives you, you talked about the law of the lid. That's the law of the lid for a brand. The passion of the culture sets the lid for the passion of the customer.
So good, David. So good. Well, this has been an unbelievable conversation, and I will include links to your website and your book and all the ways that people can connect with you, your course. As we hop off, anything you want to leave leaders with?
Oh, wow. Here, I guess if I were to summarize everything we've talked about, and if people really want to create the job they would never want to retire from and create jobs that the people that they lead would never want to retire from, I think these may be the 4 things. I had 4 things coming in that Dave Kaplan. I want to give you 4 things going out.
Come on.
I think the greatest leaders understand the power of love in the marketplace. That love is not a word that most people connect to business very often. But here's what I would tell you. If you can create an environment where people love what they do, and that's all about finding the right people, putting them in the right seat on the bus, all that, but using their unique gifts and strengths and that, but they love what they do. Secondly, they love who they're doing it with. Like they get to show up every day and they say, I can't believe I get to do life with all these people at work. So many people I know, it's thank God it's Friday. For me, it was always thank God it's Monday because I get back to these amazing people that I love being around, I love doing life with. So love what you do, love who you do it with, love the mission you're on. The greatest brands and have to have a mission, a purpose, a meaning well beyond money. Jim Collins said that true greatness comes in direct proportion to passionate pursuit of a purpose beyond money. If you want to have a great career, if you want to have a great brand, you got to have a purpose beyond money for which your business exists, for which your career exists. It's got to be a mission you're excited about. And then finally, you got to love who you're becoming in the process of accomplishing that mission. If you can love what you do, love who you do it with, love the mission you're on, and love who you're becoming in the process of accomplishing that mission, you got a real shot at having a job you wouldn't want to retire from.
Come on, David, this has been unbelievable. You just dropped leadership gold after leadership gold after leadership gold. So thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime. Thank you for everything you do.
It's been my pleasure and a real joy to be with you, Doug.
Well, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with David. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/347. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and today I'll quote Bob Goff, who I love. He said this, he said, "We don't need more information, we need more examples. Be that person, and you will change the world." So good, Bob. Thank you. Well, hey, hope you enjoyed the episode. Know that Laura and I love you. We believe in you, and we say it every episode, but don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership.